came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitudes, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with her branches and with a shadowing shroud. And of an high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deeps him up on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers to all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing today in the book of Daniel. This chapter 4 in Nebuchadnezzar's, what do they call it? Nebuchadnezzar's madness, Nebuchadnezzar's time among the beasts. Let's read from the beginning of the chapter. It's not a whole lot. Still a good read every time. Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house, and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them. But they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at the last Daniel came before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. Thus were the visions of my head. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. One moment, please. Okay, pardon me. To the end of all the earth, verse 12. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof. And all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, Hew down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from a man, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof. For as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonied for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown, and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. And whereas thy king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, Hew the tree down, and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure to thee. After that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. It's a fine example of how religion was invented to control people. It's like, I always think that's funny. It's like, yeah, break off your sins, show mercy to the poor. Oh, yeah, God forbid we should be controlled in such a fashion. Brainwashed. Verse 28. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon, that I have built for the house of the kingdom by might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling place shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as an oxen, as oxen. Well, as an ox. I just didn't see the plural. And his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. See, poetically, I want to say like the claws of birds. I don't know. I just help in the King James. At the end of and at the end of the days, I Nebuchadnezzar lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, for the glory of mine kingdom. Mine honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom. An excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment. 3 of the watchers. Now that's interesting. Now that's something I can sink my teeth into. Because it seems to me to point to something like what you see in Job. Yeah, I mean, like the angelic observation and commentary that sort of implies that, you know, that there is, because again, the watchers and the Holy One, there is God is obviously recognizes God as God, but there are these lesser celestial beings that he calls watchers, and that even the voice speaks. And we're going to assume those to be angels, and generally I think that's what everyone assumes them to be. Because he says a watcher and a holy one. Now that part I don't know what to make of as far as like him calling it a watcher, so much as that's what his conceptualization of what he saw was. But the voice also refers to the watcher. This matter is by the decree of the watchers. Those that, again, I forgot the exact. It means that, right? You know, those who. I'm trying to remember the exact formulation from the. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. From the Strong's Concordance. This is by decree of the watchers. Eerie. Well, the ones who are awake. To the woke, right? Because that's why I said it's not a good thing. To be alert and awake is something we are called. We are called to be watchmen. The idea of woke is like a play on something like being a watcher. Now, you know, and the reason I meant something like Job, if you're not familiar with it, at the beginning of the book of Job, there's a scene portrayed in heaven where, you know, Satan comes before God, and God says, "What have you been up to?" And he says, "I've been walking to and fro on the earth." And God says, "Have you seen my servant Job?" And they have this conversation. And Satan, who is called in the New Testament the devil, which is diabolos, which means a traducer, which is someone who's like a slanderous accuser. And that's what Satan is doing and portrayed as doing in the book of Job. You know, Satan, his role very often in the Bible is to lure people to sin and then accuse them before God for having done what they did. See, look it. You know, especially the servants of God, you know. And at least that seems to be, that's what the scriptures record. And also important figures such as kings often come into contact with these. And I think of the other incident when the prophet Micaiah or Micaiah, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, from the book of Kings, the books of the Kings and the Chronicles, but I think specifically in the Kings, I forget if it's first or second Kings, around the 20s, whatever. I'm not always perfect with the addresses. But you probably remember the incident the prophets of Baal were before King Jehoshaphat and Jehoshaphat and Ahab, of course, Mr. Evil and Jezebel's husband. You know, the prophets, not the prophets, they're just the false prophets. They're all prophesying, "Oh, go and you're going to have a great battle," and all that. And then Micaiah says, "Oh yeah, go ahead. You know, it's going to be wonderful." He doesn't say it exactly like that, but the king immediately goes like, I know you're not telling me the truth. I strictly commanded you to only say what God said. And he's like, okay, I saw the children of Israel scattered like sheep without a shepherd. Prophesying basically the king. See, didn't I tell you he'd say nothing but good? And so the prophet goes on to explain, how he saw in vision the throne of God. And before God, God was at, the host of heaven was gathered before God, the armies of heaven, as Daniel describes them here, or as, not Daniel, but as the book of Daniel through Nebuchadnezzar describes them, the armies of heaven, gathered on his right hand and his left. And he said, who will go down for me and persuade Ahab that he, was it Ahab or whatever, the king of Israel, that I know, to go, to go to battle so that he may be slain. And one spirit said one thing, and one the other. And eventually there came a lying spirit and said, I will be a lying spirit in the mouth. Oh, I came forth a spirit who said, I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets. But when we talk about things like wakeful watchers, those who are alert in the heavens, it's like, God, there are those who, like I said, God knows everything. But that doesn't mean that he is particularly focused on everything. You know what I mean? Just like, he says, like when he describes his own as the, I will guard you as the apple of my eye and all that. It means something very precious. There's a distinction. It's not all equivalent. And so I wonder what the role of such things in the heavens are. I can't intrude much beyond that. Like I said, it's like that when it says that does give you an insight when it calls them the watchers by decree of the watchers. So what is that saying? Well, just as Satan accused certain things before God, the watchers begin just like, does God need all this? No, but it exists. And it doesn't matter how you conceptualize it. It's a thing that sort of, you got to think of like the moral implications of it as the most important component. See, they watch the kingdoms and affairs of men. The things that are influenced by the principalities and powers, the rulers of darkness of this world. The host of heaven is both good and evil. There are evil angels and good. Now, that doesn't mean they're all gathered together and having a good time together. And all that. Let that not be too much of a stumbling block as far as trying to think of that in too much of a material sense. Because since we're talking about spirits. And so, you think about it in terms of a spirit, it can be here and also metaphorically gathered with God as far as in communion with him in some dimension or whatever, things beyond our comprehension. Because like the way things work behind the veil is very mysterious. If you don't acknowledge that, if you try to get too concrete about it and say too many things about it, I think you get into trouble. Like I said, worshiping of angels and intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. We don't want to be too clever for our own good. But what I'm saying is, in this verse 17, this matter is by decree of the watchers. Like you think about the Tower of Babel came into mind. This reminds me very much of the Tower of Babel. When it says later on, when Daniel, and we're going on to the next part too, but when Daniel says, because I got to put it all together. When Daniel says, your kingdom is a great kingdom. If you look at a map, Babylon didn't extend to the whole world. It wasn't a global kingdom. But in the world in which it dealt, what happens is the reason they ruled the world is because in their sphere of influence, they were unrivaled. There was no other petty kingdom rivaling them, no great kingdom to, they were dominant. And that's all, in other nations, eventually Persia is going to rise up against them and conquer them in a couple generations. Well, not long after Nebuchadnezzar's death. I think it's his grandson. But, sometimes those kingdoms are very fragile because they depend on often a charismatic leader, which Nebuchadnezzar does seem to be. He has gifts and talents. Not just militarily, but it seems, whatever. He seems to have, the Lord has smiled upon him and given him grace to give him this dream and to cause this 7 times to pass upon him. A perfection of correction, a perfection of chastisement. Because that's how I would characterize what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Was it for his sins? Well, you could say that, yes. And was it for his destruction? Was it an ultimate punishment? Or no, it was till he would see. So ultimately for his good. And that's the thing is like, when things happen to us and we undergo things, if we give up and surrender to sin and all that, it's like we ultimately show ourselves to be, worthy of those things. But when we go through things and then realize God reigns in heaven, we have to confront that and we have to face him. We're going to confront the judgment seat of Christ, and we're going to give an answer. And we can either do that with the blood of Christ on us, so that we don't have to make any plea on our own behalf, but rather it's already paid. And like I said, but whether he's going to regard you as covered by that blood. What's it going to cause God? You say, well, I believe this story. That should be good enough, right? And I can just live however I want. Did you read the story? If you read the story, you wouldn't think that was a viable option. Jesus himself talked about the guy who showed up at the wedding feast not having on a wedding garment. It's not something I would advise. Okay. So we need to be changed by the things that happen to us. When God sends chastisement, don't let it harden your heart, as it often does the wicked. Curse God and die, as Job's wife said. Because that's what people say. Bad things have happened. I hate my life. God, go to forget it. I don't want to live. And what I'm saying, back to the decree of the watchers, when they see things going on, these are beings that watch. They start making noise about it. And they demand justice. Just like, because Satan will demand justice from God. And as far as like when he accuses you, what he's saying is like, look at him. That demands punishment. Wouldn't you say? The watchers agree. They all watch. If you're fair, Satan is there constantly, he is the accuser of us. And by accusing us, he brings God into question. If you're so just, why do you let this go on? Why does he keep getting away with that? Don't you think you have to punish him at least a little? They watch. They watch the affairs of men. They see. And the evil voices speak evil. Look at that. And not only of their own. What have you been seeing lately? Oh, I watched the rich greedily gather themselves more riches. Would you like a list of names? Would you like to know who's the naughtiest? Would you like to know who's most ready to die or worthy of it? Not that God doesn't know. But the point is, they don't so much, it's portrayed as like, oh, what do you got to tell me? But it's, what I see is like they observe and it cries out. Like the blood of Abel cried out from the ground. You know what I mean? The watchers cry out as they observe and wakefully make note of what's going on the earth. The Tower of Babel. Let us go down and see. I don't know if it said, let us go down and, well, what does it say? What was the exact verbiage there? So it doesn't have to be the exact same word either. We went too far. Oh no, Babel is like 11. And the Lord came down to see the tower, to see the city and the tower. He came down to look at it. Let us go down. There's like that let us also aspect. But God can go down to see, but there are others that watch. said, like the blood, like the souls of them that are under the altar. Like the blood of Abel, crying out for vengeance. The watchers watch what goes on, and they complain. This is the way I look at it. They demand the holy ones. No, I wonder if the watchers are the evil angels, and because like they're awake and alert, or I don't know. It's supposition. I don't think so. It's not by decree of the watch. I don't think they get to decide anything as far as evil angels. So I don't know. But to the degree, if you could think about it, if the evil angels are watching the righteous and accusing them, then you think about like the parable of the tares. The good angels seemed really. What would you do? Should we root up the tares immediately? That's what they'd like to do. So the good angels, I suppose you could look at it as the ones who watch out the evil, and they say, hey, do you see how out of hand this is getting? Do you see how puffed up with pride Nebuchadnezzar is in Babylon? And they may even say, I thought you had good intentions towards him, since you allowed him to sack your temple. It's interesting that the king that he allowed to sack the temple was the king that you could, this to me looks like some sort of conversion. I don't know how else you'd characterize it. Maybe not to Judaism, but to a faith towards God that is whatever. By the light that we're given and by the mercy that God shows, we can be delivered into his arms, through the resurrection. So I don't know. I'm not judge of any man, though it says we shall judge angels. Not right now. So by decree, demand by the word of the holy ones. Because men should not be allowed to get above their station, I guess. And it's interesting because this tree motif of the tree grown, like I said, it's used a lot. I played Ezekiel 31. The tree that grows up and all the birds nested in the beasts under it. It's this, it's the idea of a kingdom, a great kingdom. But again, all great kingdoms can be brought down. And it's interesting that they're portrayed as things like towers, trees. They grow big and everything dwells under its shadow. That's why, Nebuchadnezzar, you are this great king, this great tree. Now, Daniel it says he was astonished for 1 hour. One thing I thought was kind of interesting in this chapter is we have 1 hour used here, and it also used towards the end, where it says the same hour was the thing fulfilled. And it's interesting to me because when you talk about the same hour versus 1 hour, it's like, does it mean he actually a whole hour transpired? No, what it means is just like the thing happened. It was like that, about that moment, about that time. Maybe not immediately, but but the second time when it says the same hour, it means just about immediately. And this one means probably immediately, of course, but for a bit. For a whole hour, it's probably a figure of speech that means for a spell. At least a spell enough for the king to be somewhat, and he speaks to him. Why is Daniel's thoughts trouble him? Well, Nebuchadnezzar is kind of a hothead. And he's known to have people thrown into furnaces and have them cut in pieces and, their houses made into dunghill. And not that Daniel's afraid of dying for the Lord, but he doesn't want to, but it's like still, he knows the interpretation of the dream. The magicians may have known the interpretation of the dream, quite honestly, because it's not that hard to interpret. But when they hear it, this one they may not want to say what it means. Like that first dream that Daniel interpreted for him, with the statue with the head of gold. It's like after you comes all these kingdoms. It's like the future. It doesn't. What's that? The future. After I'm dead. After I'm dead, I'm gonna try to set up the kingdom for after I'm dead. I see there's gonna be a succession of kingdoms. Well, what comes after me is not gonna be as good as me. Not surprising. The good old days. It's interesting though, like the way it's portrayed as a decline. And in many ways, it's interesting that as societies move forward technologically, often they also move backwards in terms of like, morality. Not just morality like, don't do that and don't do this. Just ethics, like the ethics of like hard work, the ethics of patience and determination. Things like, if you work hard and you put your best into things, things just moral and ethical and all the things like we used to hold to be important in society, they begin to deteriorate. And that happened with Rome also. Rome, the republic that built the empire, eventually was corrupted and crumbled. And they didn't have the morality we do, but they had a kind of morality. A work ethic and the Roman ethic, so to speak, of like who they were, what they were doing. They understood themselves. But when you lose that, and you see in the kingdoms that follow, it's like they're not exactly successors to Babylon. So, but they are also, even though they aren't exactly successor kingdoms, they're successive. I mean, it's not just like a successor kingdom would be like, as far as what I mean by it, I don't know if I'm right, if that's a technical distinction, but I'm thinking of like where you have kingdom after kingdom in the same place, basically by the same people. But like in England, you had a success, like the English crown has had all these different monarchs over it. You know what I mean? But it's still been the crown over the islands there. Whereas Babylon is part of all those empires, but they're actually, they're bigger and they encompass larger parts. So why are they not as golden? Well, it's something to think about anyways. But like I said, in a sense of a golden age, as far as absolute rule, as far as that goes, I suppose maybe there was something about Babylon. And they say that we still don't know how they did those hanging gardens or whatever, but I don't know. I don't know if that was during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. It's not really something I know a lot about. So, Daniel says, let the dream be to those that hate you and your enemies, because he knows it's bad. He wants to start off by, let this be unto those that hate you. And so he wants it. It's like, when you're going into a cold bath or a hot bath or whatever, you like to know what the water temperature is like before. You don't want to get a shock. If it's cold, you want to know it's cold. You're like, okay, I can be ready. It's going to be cold, If it's going to be hot, okay, it's a little different mentality. I don't like being surprised. And I don't think Nebuchadnezzar does either, and that's what Daniel's trying to avoid. He doesn't want to have a punchline at the end to like cause the king to fly into a fury. This is because Daniel is wise. It's not because he's a coward. Because like I said, Jesus avoided the Pharisees when they wanted to kill him. It wasn't because he was chicken and he didn't want to die. It's because it wasn't time to die. Sometimes it's not time to die. That's why I say I don't necessarily yield until my Lord gives me to know I should yield, or until I have no possibility of resistance. You seek to preserve your life. We have to, things that we do understand or can understand, God, we have the ability to just take care of ourselves. And God will, while he will bless us in that, he isn't about being our little genie in a bottle. But he will do amazing things for us. And when we seek him, we find him. It's not, we may think we need more assurances. I certainly think I always do. I always think I could use more. And God knows it's true. But, my grace is sufficient for thee. As he said to Paul, hey, you have my grace. So that means you can screw up a bit. Because that's what my grace is sufficient for you. I want this to pass, Lord. You got my grace. That's good enough. and then you can sort out the rest. Because again, it's not about, when we talk about working out our own salvation in the Christian sense, it's not about working for your salvation. It's about figuring out what your salvation looks like. I'm saved, so what happened? Why? And I started following the Lord. That may seem kind of strange, but yeah. You, O King, you are grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven. In the metaphorical sense, because it's not like the Tower of Babel literally built up to the heavens. Again, he uses, let us build a tower that reacheth unto heaven. Before they did it, God confounded their language, right? Now, the idea that they actually could do it, this could be considered maybe even hyperbole. Meaning he's saying it's just about there, Because truly, to ascend to heaven, again, there's a reason. And when it says it reacheth to heaven, there's a reason why it says that, there's a reason why the king of Babylon is one of the most important sources we have for understanding the nature of Satan. Because how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, O Halel ben Shakar in Hebrew, which means bright star, son of the dawn, morning star, as we say in English. How art thou fallen from heaven, morning star, bright star, you who shone brightly, who reached to the heavens. You who said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. I will ascend above the heights of clouds. I will be like, I actually paraphrased it and skipped over parts of it. But, Isaiah chapter 14, you read that there. Now, people will say, well, that's about the king of Babylon. Like, yes, it is. But the book of Revelation specifically connects Babylon with the beast of Revelation, because the great whore is Mystery Babylon. It's the woman, the bride is portrayed as Babylon. She says, I sit a queen. How did she get to be a queen? Well, the church was supposed to be waiting to be a chaste virgin to be presented to Christ, as Paul talked about in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, wasn't it? Or first, whatever. I would not have you be seduced from the simplicity that is in Christ, but rather present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But in the book of Revelation, we see Babylon, who is guilty of fornication but calls herself a queen. She has married a king. Who did this Mystery Babylon marry? The king of Babylon. The king of Babylon. Who's the king of Babylon? Well, Nebuchadnezzar was, but he's dead. Who's the spiritual head of Babylon? Well, it's Satan. And that's why that's why the scriptures that detail the fall of the king of Babylon are considered by almost all Christians to be about Satan. And that's why King James only people freak out when they take Lucifer out of that passage. I mean, I understand, but they should be made to understand that's from the Catholic Vulgate. That's just all that is, Lucifer. And Lucifer literally means morning star, just in another language. So they get offended that the NIV translated it morning star. That's the least of the NIV's sins. And again, when I say that, I say the King James also has sins, and translating morning star Lucifer is not one of the greatest ones either, because honestly, it makes a good connection, even though, like I said, I would prefer to be presented with the exact thing the scriptures say. I wish it would say something like bright star, son of the dawn, which is a more of an exact translation of what the Hebrew phrasing is. So whenever we read, like in Ezekiel 31, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches, but it's talking to Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And then the king of Babylon also has this tree symbology, and we have this tree with the snake coiled around it in the garden. And we have, now Revelation doesn't really talk much about, is there a tree in Revelation? Well, there's a tree of life, of course. Tree of knowledge of evil, good and evil doesn't come into it. But since the serpent does. And here's the thing. Many, when the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about, it says, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, claiming that he is God. Where does Paul get that? Well, there's places like in Revelation, in the book of Isaiah chapter 11, or 14, sorry, where it says, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, according to the Psalms, I think in the 40s there, maybe 40, or is it, I forgot the exact Psalm. But beautiful for situation is Mount Zion in the sides of the north, the city of the Lord. That refers to the holy place of Jerusalem. Where would did Paul just make that up? It was the Isaiah 14, it just had nothing to do with Satan or the Antichrist, if you would prefer. Had nothing to do with the Antichrist, the man of sin, the son of perdition. Oh no. Isaiah 14 is only about the king of Babylon, and Ezekiel 31 is only about the Pharaoh, and the Assyrian, and the king of Tyre later on, or different parts. 28, the prince of Tyre. Same thing. These earthly kings. See, a lot of times, because the prophets record things that happen, and they illustrate facts about the way God judges the world. And these great kingdoms that arise and fill themselves with wickedness, they do not last. Babylon was a great kingdom, but it also fell precipitously. Because whatever God was able to teach Nebuchadnezzar, he learned it late in life. And, lessons learned late, and if you're raised atheist and your dad is 70 and turns to God, that may have an influence on you or it may not. Depends on where your life is. I don't know how old Nebuchadnezzar was when he died, but he had adult sons when this happens. And so, thy dominion to the end of the earth. Again, these, like I said, it doesn't mean global. Just means there's no rivals anywhere in your realm of influence. All go start writing. Tell me when you find someone who can oppose the king of Babylon. There was nothing anywhere that could oppose them at that time. So while they didn't directly march into Persia or whatever, or deep into the land of the Medes, let's say, just as the Romans didn't conquer the Parthians, but for many years, the Parthians weren't a threat. It wasn't until later. The dominion to the end of the earth. Whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew down the tree, destroy it, leave the stump, even with a band of iron and brass. I think the band refers to the idea of if you put a band on a tree to prevent it from growing again. Because like I said, they come back right away. And the idea, I think, is like saying until 7 times passed upon it, bind it in this state. Binding and loosing. There's a lot of binding and loosing in the New Testament, like where people are they're in bondage to sin. A lot of the stories are told from that kind of perspective. When someone is someone who's afflicted for a number of years, it's likened to a sort of bondage. Sin is a kind of a bondage, a service. And very often, if you've experienced sin, it can be like a service. You end up serving it. You have to go and do it again and again and again. That's what it demands. One-off sins exist too, things you don't necessarily do over and over in your life, but they can be equally devastating. Because like I said, often we aren't tested in certain things. We don't know. You don't, unless, a man may not know how good he is at resisting adultery until someone has attempted to seduce him. He may not know. He may think he's faithful, and maybe he generally is and would never look for it. But then someone I'm always, The Lord showed me long ago, I am a fleer of seduction is actually what I do. I've fled it. Fortunately, as a married man, I haven't had that problem. I think I exude the proper spirit of a married man. This is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my Lord the King, that they shall drive thee from men, thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, they shall make thee to eat grass as an oxen. I keep wanting an oxen, I don't know why. I think the N, I keep dyslexically reading that as in front of the ox. Okay, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven. Well, I mean, I don't mean by they. Does it mean the watchers? I think ultimately it sort of does, because people will drive him out, but that's not really why. You know what I mean? Like, if you're behaving like a beast, like literally, if you're going around town, you know, like the guy in the New Testament, right? He was wild, and then he ended up living in the tombs because no one wanted him around. And so that was the only place he could dwell. People would drive him out from among men. When people were crazy, often that's what would happen. And that, you know, to this day, mentally ill people are sort of driven out of society, and they end up homeless and on the streets because we don't do a good job taking care of them, unfortunately. Very unfortunately. You know, it's hopefully one of those things that people will kind of wake up to over time. That, like, you know, especially in the places where they're creating, you know, where they're trying to solve homelessness by just incentivizing it and making it easier to be homeless and drug addicted, you know, and by continually making it easy to be that, you know, not that I'm saying they should be like just harsh, but they, you know, what happens is when people, whatever, I'm not gonna solve the problem here on the Bible study, but there's ways to deal with these things, especially people that are severely ill. But anyways, but this is, you know, this is ancient times. The king starts going insane, which is essentially what happens. He turns into basically like he's an animal. They shall make thee, you know, it's the things in his head that are making him do these things. So he's starting to act like an animal. You know, so yeah, people are going to drive you out, but it's ultimately the things that are come upon you. They shall drive thee from men, thy dwelling place shall be with the beasts of the field, etc., etc., until 7 times pass over you. Again, the number 7, like 7 trumpets, 7 vials. Whenever you see 7, it's like a favorite number meant to be sort of like a perfect number. Like the number of times you forgive someone. What, 7 times? And Jesus says, no, 7 times 70. That's how many times. And also, in Daniel's prophecies, again, there's going to be a whole thing about 7s. And of course, the days are divided into 7. So it's a very significant number. It indicates completeness. Every week is completed by 7 days. The 8th day being the new day. And that's, you know, Christ raising on the first day of the week was, you know, essentially the 8th day, or the first day, however you like it. But you know, often the number 8 is associated with Christ in certain things, and gematria and all that, which is the taking of numbers out of the scriptures, which I don't disbelieve in it, but I just find it of limited utility. Meaning that there are greater truths to be jammed into my head just on the surface, you know, without having to go deeply into numbers and formulas and stuff that need computers to analyze the text. I just think that's pretty, you know, using the computers to analyze the text to look for patterns in words and messages. They basically type in the messages they're looking for, and then the computer somehow makes a way to find it. So there's a mixture there of some stuff that's probably of a valid inquiry and some stuff that's probably not valid. When you're talking about, you know, numbers and the Bible code and stuff like that, the Lord left the scriptures, you know, so that ultimately everyday people could understand them. The word of God, you know, except you utter with the tongue words that are easy to be understood. How's anyone going to understand at your giving of thanks to say amen? You know, we have to use words that are easy to understand. They commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots. Whereas they commanded, I think they means the watchers and the angels, the holy ones. They are going to be responsible. Go ahead, do it. Right? Like God said to Satan in the book of Job. I mean, whether, like I said, it doesn't, like I said, I believe the book of Job is true. I don't know if it's literally history, but it's true. That's how things work. That's what I believe. Yeah, I believe in the book of Job. But again, I don't know that it needs to be historical, though it could be, however you like. But it's like, in some ways it reads like a parable, and that long recorded discussion seems to be the point. Like all the things they argue about. I was thinking we're going to do the book of Job sometime along here. Coming up. Because I think it'd be good. I'd like to go through the whole thing and like look at their arguments. Because you know how to regard the arguments. That's the interesting thing. We know that the friends are wrong and that Job is right, and that or more righteous, anyways. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be accepted thee. Break off thy sins. We talked about that a lot last time because this is the most important thing he could do. This is why. The most important part of the dream is to tell him it's a warning. You've grown too big for your britches. You have sins. How do you break off your sins? Well, do righteousness. And here he's, while no amount of doing good deeds can pay for my sins, I'll never be able to take a ledger and mark on one side the sins and then the good things I did as payment. Because God does not take good deeds as payment for sin. God takes blood in payment for sin. Yours, for your own sins, mostly. But he'll accept Christ's. And in his mercy, he in the past has also accepted the blood of goats, even though it doesn't work. It doesn't work, but he'll accept it. He has accepted offerings of men. Just like he accepts men getting divorced. Not that it's real, but not that it's what he intended, but it's because of the hardness of our hearts. Because divorce is better than murder. That's the way I look at it. It's like a lot of things. There are things that are tolerated and that we can tolerate. And then, especially in the name of Christ, because even Jesus himself tolerated adultery, meaning he did not execute the sentence of death. That doesn't mean you just tolerate adultery in your like among your friend, like among your fellowship. Like, oh, there's just adultery, we tolerate it. No. What it means is you don't fully punish them. It's like with divorce. Divorce is a punishment in and of itself. It's people are suffering through that, and it's going to damage their relationships with their children if they have any. They may say, "Oh, well, my relationship is fine." It isn't what it could have been. It isn't what it could have been. Don't tell me otherwise, because you're wrong. It just isn't what it could have been. You can still forge a relationship, and even a good one. Just you won't be able to. It just won't be the beautiful thing you can have when you get to grandchildren and ultimately great grandchildren and dying faithful. Wherefore, O king, okay, but in thine iniquities you break off. I wonder what the word break off is. It just break off? We don't have much time here. Once again, and I guess we will spend a little more time on this chapter. I like it. I confess I don't mind talking about this chapter again and again. There's still more to be talked about, but it's interesting because he is saying the way you break off your iniquity, you've done bad, so do good. Show mercy to the poor. You can go out of your way to do things. And what I'm saying is it doesn't earn you salvation, but the Lord doesn't, he notices, and he certainly will, that you if you show mercy, those who show mercy are just more likely to get it. Or put it the way the Lord is, those that show no mercy shall receive judgment without mercy. Show mercy. If it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility, you may, the peace and tranquility that you enjoy now, that doesn't have to end. It can continue and be lengthened. I think he was saying the word is sure, but This is the way out. Now, just because a potential escape is offered doesn't really negate the sureness of the prophecy. Because, of course, Nebuchadnezzar does not heed the warning. He believes in Daniel. He trusts him, as far as like he believes he can interpret dreams and all that. But you can see even in the tenor of this, he has this dream. And the way he asks Daniel, the way he relates, the way he asks him, like the king, let me see, his dream troubled him and he wanted to know it. But he doesn't seem deeply, like he wasn't frightened by it, perhaps. I don't know. Not enough. Obviously not enough. Because if he had, not that there was any real chance that he would, but the point, like all the wicked, they are given the alternative in a sense. Just like our conscience that works this way. We always have the opportunity to do right. We always have that chance. We have a reminder, at least until our conscience has become so seared and cauterized from continual sin that we no longer hear the operation of that image of God in us, that piece of it, that shadow of it, whatever you want to call it, that tells us the truth, that speaks the truth from deep inside our hearts, because we are made in his image and we know. We have that knowledge of good and evil. We're not only made in his image, but we also have a little something to make us even more godlike. But not in a good way necessarily. Because we're not good enough to handle. I suppose, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Why is it? Well, it's, like I said, would you like the world if God was just like us? If he would just violate his conscience? Excuse me. Okay. And that's the purpose. The tree, he will be returned to his kingdom. Break off your sins. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. And because I can't, at the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom. And then he makes his boast. Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power? I have established, this is like, my legacy. And not only is he's gonna lose this, but also in the next chapter, the guy I think is his grandson. I forgot why I think that. I could look it up, but I'm not gonna bother. It's because it's not a critical detail either. I got this. Whatever. Like I said, that stuff is readily available. If it's important to you, it's the kind of thing you should go study on your own because it's boring in a study like this, in my opinion. Well, it's boring if I go looking it up, actually. If I had it all at the tip of my fingertips, it'd be probably interesting. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for my house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? I built it for me. In this, and again, you think it's so great? You think it's so great? You haven't been hearing the cry of the poor that can cry out continually into the ears of the Lord? Sometimes I feel like that about our country. We think we're so great. And I do think America it's a great country if you're an American. But our government is doing a lot of things in our name that I wish it wouldn't all over the world and has been for a long time. We're behaving. Since we won World War II, we're basically an empire. And we've been acting like an empire. And now we're acting like a dying empire, unfortunately. You can be, what we should have done? It's too bad. But we should have retired as an empire. We could still do this. We should do it. We're going to do it. We're either going to retire involuntarily or we're going to get killed. Hopefully we won't get killed as an empire, nuclear exchange or something like that. That'll do us in. They'll do in the whole civilization of the world. Humanity will continue. Oh yeah, humanity would go on. Diminished, impoverished. So we'll continue at verse 31. and hopefully finish. Oh, I think we'll definitely. Yeah, we have to. We can't just brush off and say, "Yeah, we covered it enough." We'll cover the last aspect of it. We'll probably get into chapter 5. So we may not read the whole chapter again, even though I like reading these chapters. They're enjoyable. It reminded me how I thought a long time ago. I don't know if you know my song Joel 1. But Joel 1 was almost Daniel 4 as far as the guitar part. That was supposed to be Nebuchadnezzar the king unto all people, nations, and language. I wrote the first verse, but it didn't wash out. It went somewhere else with that. So, anyways, thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to being back in tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll finish up this chapter. I'm sure we'll finish this chapter, and hopefully, we'll get into the next one too. Until then. What happened? Oh, that's the wrong video. There we go.
And it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitudes, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with her branches and with a shadowing shroud. And of an high stature, his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deeps him up on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers to all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and